Hi everybody. Today I want to talk about movement with the human body. I started taking anatomy, didn't know anything about how the human body worked. Didn't I kind of knew some of the organs, didn't really know where they work, just kind of a big tube. But what I really found interesting was skeletal muscle contraction. So what I figured I would try to do, which is kind of difficult, but I would try to go over every aspect of how the human body functions. So what I did was I drew out this little human body map, which is a pretty poor drawing, but you've got the basic, you can really see, so you've got the brain and then the different parts of the brain, the spinal cord, and then the nerves running off from the spinal cord itself. I've got a little drawing of a neuron and then its axon component, the dendrite, and then I've got a picture of a cell and how a cell is constructed. Okay. So basically, why I wanted to do that was to kind of point out that everything fundamentally has membranes, right? So when we learn anatomy, we learn about uh, that there are different structures, and we learn about them in different ways because fundamentally each layer of the structure has different forms of its membrane. But if you go to the base layer of a cell, the basic structure is lipids. It's a phospholipid bilayer, which basically means it's got fat in the middle, and then the outside connects to the extracellular fluid, which is basically water. And then the inside of the cell, which is the cytosol, is also basically water. So you've got these components and then they make up this membrane, right? So with the skeletal muscle, you've got something called membrane potential. So you've got the brain, the nervous system, part of the nervous system. You've got the white layer and then the gray layer, and basically the white layer is myelinated, which means that it's coated in fat. So very similar to a cell made of the same component. Fats are one of the fundamental things that we need to build the structure of our body, along with proteins. So when you've got this myelination happening, when you go down to the neuron with axons, what they do is you go from the spinal cord, and we're talking skeletal muscle, so that means that it's voluntary, right? So I've got a picture of smooth muscle. So this is tunics of a blood vessel, and a blood vessel functions, obviously we can't make our blood vessels dilate or contract. So that is actually smooth muscle that is connected to nerves right here, right? So the nerves attach. The basically they also have they're innervated with their own blood. So even a tiny blood vessel needs blood and oxygen, whatever, to survive. But so the basic differences is smooth muscle is involuntary. Our organs and all that, they have their own enteric smooth muscle nervous system, and then the skeletal muscle is voluntary, so we can kind of wiggle around and do our own thing. So, that being said, neurons control every aspect. Our brain goes down through our nervous system. The neurons kind of reach out with their axons, and then what you get is electrical activity. So, why I brought up the lipid, the phospholipid bilayer, is electrical activity runs down through that bilayer. See, I've got another picture here. And it creates what's called an action potential. Okay? So, ions, which I never quite understood because we use a lot of different names for things, but we need ions for everything. So, you would think hydrogen is a big one, and sodium, potassium, chloride, things like that. We need in lots of amounts, and they're kind of trace amounts throughout our body. But basically, ions, what they are they're polarized. So with one of the most important, or two of the most important, are the sodium and potassium. And what they do is, let me step back, like proteins exist within a membrane of a cell. There's lots of different kinds of proteins. Proteins are made up of bundles of amino acids formed in different ways. Proteins are so complex, they're really important for our body because they a protein can be an enzyme. And if without an enzyme, our bodies cannot catalyze all the nutrients we're trying to digest. So catalyze, so uh, an enzyme, a protein that turns into an enzyme, breaks down food. Well, it breaks down molecular structure. It hydrolyzes, so it takes water and it takes those components in between molecules, and then it breaks them up or it builds them up. So you can either like build something and have an anabolic reaction, or you can break it up and have it be a catabolic reaction, right? So basically what the value of a protein is immense, and they're kind of my favorite thing to study. But so what you have these ions that are inside the cytosol and outside in the extracellular fluid of all cells and all parts of your body. And what this does is just along the outside of the plasma membrane, it creates a charge difference. And that charge difference, what things want to do is, if there's a high concentration, it wants to go to the lower concentration to even things out. So what that does is it creates a potential. So with the membrane being in between them, it creates a membrane potential. And ions cannot travel except through a protein, cannot travel through the membrane because it's charged. So you'll need what are like protein pumps, and those need a voltage. So they need an electrical impulse sent from the brain down to the spinal cord and then out. And then what's going to happen is that impulse is going to go through the plasma membrane. And then what's going to happen is these voltage gated channels, protein channels, which need a source of energy, which is ATP inside the cytosol. What they do is they open, and then the ions, the sodium ions, the first one will be the sodium, and the gate will open and the sodium will flood in, and it's called depolarization. So it takes a polarized cell and then it depolarizes it. So it makes it positive very quickly and in a very small space. Okay? And then when the voltage gets really high inside the cell, really positive, then what's going to happen is that's going to close, that voltage gated sodium channel is going to close, and then it's going to open up the potassium gated, and then the potassium is going to flood out of the cell. Now this is very on such a small scale, and it really only happens right around the surface. So so the value of that is, that's how electric energy gets moved through our bodies, through our cells, through that phospholipid. Without fats, we wouldn't be able to do this, right? And also axons they've got that myelinated fat around them too. Okay, so with the skeletal muscle, how that ends up working is you've got this axon here, and this is a motor neuron. So that means that it is going to, all neurons will attach to, all muscles will have neurons attached to them. So without a neuron, the muscle won't move, essentially. So you've got this at the end of this axon is called an axon terminal. Inside of an axon terminal, when the action potential reaches down here and sends that electric potential down, this axon terminal actually has acetylcholine in it, which is a neurotransmitter. Now, neurotransmit, right? So from the nervous system, it transmits. So it goes across through, it doesn't touch the muscular fiber, but it will go through the cleft. this space. And what the neurotransmitter does is it binds again to like a protein. It's like a ligand gated channel. So you've got the different channels. So you've got the voltage gate, which opens throughout the cell, sending the action potential, and then you've got ligand gated. So with ligand gated, what it's going to do is it's not going to go in, but the acetylcholine will attach to the protein on the outside, and that will activate it opening, and then the sodium and that extracellular fluid will come flooding in to the muscle tissue or the muscle fiber. And then what that's going to do is that's going to send an electrical impulse if it's strong enough. So since it's a potential, it doesn't have to. But if it's strong enough, if there's enough sodium that travels through, what's going to happen is it's going to travel all the way through that muscle fiber, and then it's going to go down what's called the sarcolemma, the sarcomere, and basically there's just different names for the outside of cells. So muscle cell, there it has the sarcolemma is the plasma membrane basically. So and then that's going to go down, and then another important aspect which you might have heard is calcium, right? So it's going to the sodium is going to open up all these channels, and then it's going to pour down through, and then it's going to open up calcium channels. And calcium just floods in, and calcium is actually going to attach inside of these very small muscle fibers or even smaller muscle fibers. And calcium is going to attach to the muscle fiber that's not moving. And then what's going to happen is there's these little filaments, these little fibers, and the calcium is actually going to move the fibers out of the way. And what that's going to do is it's going to activate the fibers to be able to contract, so it allows movement. The ion will make energy happen, so it allows movement of the sliding filament basically. So the muscle doesn't actually like get smaller and tighter when it contracts. It actually just moves closer together, right? So it just kind of pushes in together, and then basically one of the examples is rigor mortis. So why does rigor mortis happen when somebody passes away? There's so much calcium being flooded that that muscle tension actually just like holds really really tight and doesn't let go for a few days or a few hours. I'm not sure. I think it's a few hours. Um, but basically, that's how skeletal muscle fiber contracts. And then basically, all an action potential does is it's a really quick reaction. So when that stimulation doesn't happen anymore, then the calcium will leave the intercellular space, and there won't be any flooding. All the gates will be closed, and then that will be the end. Okay, well, thank you. Bye.